Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
That's Stuart Robert, a Liberal Party politician who was in charge of Robodebt in 2019. And he was big on defending the scheme, until court cases forced him to shut it down. He was a witness at the Robodebt Royal Commission, and I want to show you some of that evidence. Now, I need to give you some important context. In July 2019, Stuart Robert had a meeting about Robodebt with the Department of Human Services. He admitted that after that meeting, his personal view was that Robodebt was unlawful. But that's not what he said to the Australian public.
In the last 4 or 5 years, the department has recovered $1.9 billion in overpayments, and we have a legal responsibility to do that. And of course, we cross-check it with the ATO, and if there's a discrepancy notice is raised. And that's the legal requirement we've got.
Do you accept, Mr. Robert, that what you've said in response to that question from Ms. Tingle is inconsistent with the state of mind you assert you held at the conclusion of the deep dive session on the 4th of July 2019?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Keeping in mind, if I've got a personal opinion, my next step is to seek the appropriate advice. Until such time as that arrives, I remain a Cabinet Minister and am responsible for holding the Cabinet line, which is what I've done in the interview. Respectfully, Mr. Scott, ministers are required to defend the government's programs as part of Cabinet solidarity, regardless if they agree with them or not, as, by the way, is the public service. I've implemented many things that I passionately disagree with, but I'm still required as a minister to represent them and defend them. And that's what I've done here, regardless of my personal sense of belief.
Well, it's not just a question of personal sense of belief. On your state of mind that you assert existed from the 4th of July 2019, you had serious doubts about the lawfulness of this program.
Well, my view was the sole use could not be sufficient. It just can't. Not just misgivings, it couldn't possibly work.
Couldn't possibly work lawfully, do you mean?
Correct, what I would call sufficiently. But just because I have a reservation, respectfully, does not mean I'm going to go on Laura Tingle's program and say I think the government program is wrong.
Well, you might not do that, but you might not express the degree of confidence in the program that you purported to in this interview.
In every interview, government ministers are expected to show confidence in the agenda of the government. There is no other way that the Westminster system operates.
Here's another example the Royal Commission brought up, this time an interview with David Spears on Sky News.
The words can continue there, but remember, David, since 1 July 15, there's been 850,000 compliance reviews finalised. In 80% of the cases, the debt's been raised, and in 99.2% of the cases, the debt is correct. Well, your evidence was that you could not raise a debt based solely on averaging.
That was my belief, yes.
And in 90% of cases, that's exactly what was happening under the program, to your knowledge at the time.
Yes, that is correct.
So what you said there, to your knowledge at the time, was false.
To my personal view, yes, but I'm still a government minister and it's still a government program, and this was the approach that Cabinet has signed off on 3 or 4 years earlier and had been going on. And until such time as I'm not a lawyer, I've got a competent legal view, it is still just my opinion.
Doesn't mean you have to misrepresent the figures, though, and say 99.2% of cases produce an accurate debt.
That's the figures from the department, Commissioner.
You're saying they were the departmental figures, but you knew they couldn't be right.
I had a massive personal misgiving, yes, but I'm still a Cabinet Minister.
Yeah, but it doesn't compel you to say things that you don't believe to be true, surely. It's one thing to stick to the policy and say this is how we do it and we're confident in the program, but to actually give statistics which you couldn't have believed to be accurate is another thing, isn't it?
They were the numbers from the department based on the working approach to how the program was being run. They were the accepted figures by government to use. And as a dutiful Cabinet Minister, ma'am, that's what we do.
Misrepresent things to the Australian public?
I wouldn't respectfully put it that way, because until such time, Commissioner, as I've got the legal opinion, I could be wrong.
This wasn't a matter of law, this was a matter of maths, really, and you could see that the maths could not be correct.
Well, the reason I used the extreme example, ma'am, to choose your words, of the $1 million was to try and stress test it. So in my view, the maths could not possibly add up.
His justification in these examples was that he needed further legal confirmation before he could cast doubt over Robodebt. The legal confirmation he's talking about is the advice of the Solicitor General, and that would come months later. In the meantime, people were still getting fake and unlawful debts. But even after he got this legal advice, confirming that Robodebt was unlawful, he still defended the program. In November 2019, he spoke at the National Press Club.
Do you see there that the transcript reveals that there is a question from, at the bottom of the page from Mr. Karp of The Guardian, refers to the Robodebt program and comments by former senior AAT member Mr. Carney that Robodebts are illegal because you can't calculate a debt based on estimates of income. And then you say, okay, I'll answer if you like. Almost 1 million Australians own $5 billion in debts, and Mr. Shorten made the point during the election campaign that no one gets a leave pass from that. So we have an absolute responsibility, including a legislative responsibility to collect debts. So using averaging as the basis to say to a citizen there may be a debt, can you please engage with us, is entirely appropriate. The truthful response to the questions from the members of the press gallery at that point in time would have been to acknowledge that the government had reached the point where averaging was unlawful.
It may well be truthful, Mr. Scott, but I wasn't permitted to. So, if I may, the ERC made it very clear that any public announcement was to be agreed. I'm just reading my diary now. Announcement to agree with the Prime Minister, Treasurer, Minister for Finance and the Attorney General. I needed 4 senior ministers to agree with me before I said anything. So whilst I accept the contention that it had been resolved on the 13th, I did not have approval to make any statement. So I've answered Mr. Karp's question very, very carefully, not to talk about the use of averaging.
But you've actually said that using averaging is entirely appropriate, and you could not have thought that for a minute, and you didn't need to say it.
With respect, Commissioner, if I may, I've said using averaging as the basis to say to a citizen, there may be a debt, please engage with us. At no point in this answer did I say use of averaging to crystallise the debt. I kept my words very tight because I knew the decision had been made. I knew I could not communicate anything about it. I'm asked a question, so I'm in a hell of a position now where I know what government's done, but I can't communicate it. So I've got to answer in no less a forum than the National Press Club in a way that says something and says nothing. It's a dreadful place for a minister to ever be in.
It's all word games for these politicians. But the reality is that during the years of Robodebt, minister after minister told the public that the scheme was accurate and justified. And as a result, countless Australians suffered. Now, unfortunately for Stuart Robert, there were other witnesses that appeared at the Royal Commission that contradicted his evidence about what he did and what he said when he was told that Robodebt was unlawful. I'll be going through that in detail in my upcoming Week 8 breakdown. And as to him lying over and over again, the Royal Commission report made their findings clear. He was making statements of fact which he knew could not be right. The Commission also said that nothing compels ministers to knowingly make false statements in the course of publicly supporting any decision or program. Soon after giving evidence, Stuart Robert stopped showing up to Parliament and then resigned. Good riddance.